courtroom was silent, suffocating. On one side, Eliza Hayes, the wife of 20 years, weeping as her life was stolen by a forged will. On the other, Serafina Vance, the mistress, smirking, already counting her inheritance. Eliza had nothing left. No money, no competent lawyer, no hope. She had been betrayed, bankrupted, and was about to be made homeless by the woman who had destroyed her family. The judge was about to sign off on her ruin. But then, Judge Evelyn Reed looked up from her papers, her eyes like steel, and uttered one simple sentence. A sentence so powerful, it didn't just stop the hearing. It made the triumphant mistress collapse to her knees in pure terror. The sterile chill of Los Angeles Probate Court, Department 9, clung to Eliza Hayes like a second skin. It was a suffocating, antiseptic cold that did nothing to numb the burning humiliation. She sat at a worn laminate table, her back rigid. Beside her, her court-appointed lawyer, Ben Carter, shuffled papers. He was a good man, Eliza knew, but he was a guppy swimming with great whites. Across the aisle was the shark tank. Julian Thorne, Esquetres, stood, his $5,000 suit hanging on him with the casual arrogance of a man who had never lost. And beside him, the architect of Eliza's ruin, sat Serafina Vance. Serafina was a masterpiece of performative grief. She was dressed in a tailored black suit that cost more than Eliza's mortgage payments. A delicate veil was pinned to her artfully undone blonde hair, and she dabbed at her dry, perfect eyes with a silk handkerchief. She was the picture of the bereaved fiancé, the new, tragic center of Arthur Hayes's universe. Eliza was just the wife, the estranged wife, as Thorne had so skillfully painted her. "Your Honor," Thorne addressed the bench, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that filled the room. "We are here today to execute the final, validated will of my late client, Mr. Arthur Hayes. It is a simple, clear, and legally binding document." He gestured to Serafina. "Mr. Hayes, in the final, lucid months of his life, found profound happiness with my client, Ms. Vance. He chose to leave his estate, the fruits of his labor, to the woman he intended to marry." Eliza's knuckles went white. His labor? She had been there from the beginning. She was the one who managed the books, secured the first loans, and skipped meals so their fledgling software company could pay its coders. Arthur was the genius, the dreamer, but she had been the architect. Now she was a footnote. "Mrs. Hayes's petition," Thorne continued, waving a dismissive hand toward Eliza, "is nothing more than a desperate, vindictive attempt to circumvent her late husband's clear wishes. She claims undue influence. She claims forgery. But what she really claims is the right to a fortune she was no longer part of." "Objection," Ben Carter mumbled, standing a beat too late. "Counsel is characterizing." "Sustained," Judge Evelyn Reed said, her voice flat. She was an older woman, sharp and bird-like, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Mr. Thorne, stick to the facts." "The facts are these, Your Honor," Thorne said, not missing a step. He projected a document onto the main screen, the last will and testament of Arthur Hayes. Signed, dated, and witnessed by 2 medical professionals. It clearly and irrevocably leaves the entirety of the Hayes estate, including the primary residence, the portfolio, and all company shares, to Ms. Serafina Vance. Eliza watched the screen, her stomach twisting. Her home. The home she had raised her son, Leo, in. The home Arthur had promised they would grow old in. "Mr. Carter," Judge Reed said, turning her gaze to Eliza's table, "you are contesting the validity of this will. On what grounds?" Ben Carter stood, visibly nervous. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Hayes was not of sound mind." He was heavily medicated. Furthermore, Mrs. Hayes spoke to her husband just 2 weeks before his death, and he explicitly stated he wanted to reconcile. He said he had made a terrible mistake. Thorne scoffed, a quiet, sharp sound. Hearsay, Your Honor. The desperate fantasy of a woman scorned. Do you have proof of this medication, Mr. Carter? Judge Reed asked. We have been unable to access Mr. Hayes's full medical records, Your Honor. Ms. Vance, as his healthcare proxy, has sealed them. And your handwriting expert? Carter winced. His testimony was deemed inadmissible, Your Honor, due to a procedural error in his filing. A quiet laugh escaped Serafina. She covered it with her handkerchief. A perfect performance. Eliza couldn't hold it in. A single hot tear rolled down her cheek, then another. This was it. She was losing. She wasn't just losing the money. She was losing the last 25 years of her life. She was being erased. Thorne saw the tears, and like a predator sensing blood, he moved in for the kill. Your Honor, we see before us a woman in pain, he said, his voice dripping with false empathy. But the court is not here to mend a broken heart. It is here to execute a man's final wish. Mrs. Hayes's tears, while unfortunate, do not change the black and white legality of this document. We move for a summary judgment. Enforce the will. Judge Reed looked at Eliza, her face unreadable. Eliza's gaze pleaded with her. Please see me. See the truth. But the judge only said, I will take Mr. Thorne's motion under advisement. The court took a 15-minute recess. As soon as the judge left the chamber, Serafina Vance stood. She glided past Eliza's table, leaning in just close enough for only Eliza to hear. You should have taken the settlement, Eliza, she whispered, her voice no longer soft and grieving, but cold and sharp. I offered you $50,000. Now you'll have nothing but your son's college debt. Enjoy the motel. Eliza flinched as if struck. She looked up, her eyes blurred with tears, and saw the truth. The pure, triumphant malice in Serafina's eyes. It was the look of a predator that had just finished its meal. It hadn't always been like this. For 23 years, Arthur and Eliza was a single entity. They were the couple everyone envied. They'd met at Stanford. He, the brilliant, chaotic coder. She, the structured, ambitious business student. He had the vision. She built the road to get there. Their company, Nexus Dynamics, was born in their Palo Alto garage, fueled by cheap pizza and Eliza's unwavering belief in him. When the first buyout offer came, Arthur wanted to sell. We'll be set, Eli. We can travel. But Eliza had refused. No, Arthur. This is a legacy. This is for Leo. We're building an empire, not a vacation home. He'd kissed her then, his eyes full of awe. You're the rocket, Eli. I'm just the guy lighting the fuse. Their empire grew. They moved to a beautiful glass and redwood house in the Pacific Palisades. Leo grew up, smart and kind, and went off to college. And with the nest empty, Arthur drifted. He hit 50, and it was like a switch flipped. He bought a ridiculous red sports car. He started talking about his artistic side. And then, 6 months before his death, he met her. Serafina Vance. She owned a small, exclusive, and perpetually failing art gallery. She was 20 years younger than him, ethereal, and breathed smoke into his ear. She told him he wasn't a tech guy. He was a visionary, an artist trapped in a businessman's body. She fed his ego in a way Eliza, who was busy running the actual company, no longer did. Eliza had tried to warn him. Arthur, she's after your money. Can't you see it? That gallery is a front. She's $300,000 in debt. You're jealous, he had shouted, the first time he'd raised his voice to her in a decade. You can't stand to see me happy. You only care about the company." The fight had been brutal. He moved out 2 days later into a sterile high-rise penthouse in downtown LA. He filed for divorce. Eliza was shattered. She spent a month in a fog, walking through the house that was no longer a home. But then she started to fight back. She hired a private investigator. The PI, a man named Sal, had dug up nothing. "It's weird, Mrs. Hayes," he'd said, scratching his head. "This Serafina Vance. It's like she was born in 2015. No college records, no family, no social security number before that. Just a driver's license and a passport that seems brand new. She's a ghost." Then came the illness. Arthur, a man who ran 5Ks on the weekends, was suddenly fading. Eliza only found out because their son, Leo, had called her, frantic. "Mum, I went to Dad's penthouse. That woman, Serafina, she wouldn't let me in. She said he had an aggressive flu and was resting. I could hear him, Mum. He sounded so weak. He cried out for me." Eliza had driven there herself, hammering on the door until Serafina finally opened it, her face a mask of polite concern. "Eliza, this is inappropriate. Arthur is very ill. His new physician, Dr. Finch, has ordered complete rest. No visitors. It's too much stress." Through the crack in the door, Eliza saw Arthur on the sofa, covered in blankets, pale and gaunt. He looked 20 years older. "Eli?" he'd whispered, his voice a dry rattle. "I'm here, Arthur. I'm calling an ambulance." "No." Serafina had stepped in the way, her body rigid. "Dr. Finch is handling everything. It's a specialized treatment. You are not his wife anymore, Eliza. You have no rights here." She'd shut the door in her face. Eliza had called the police. They came, spoke to Serafina, who produced a valid healthcare proxy agreement, signed by Arthur. The officers were sympathetic, but their hands were tied. "He's an adult, Mom. He has designated her as his caregiver. There's nothing we can do." 2 weeks later, the call came. Not from Serafina, but from Leo. He was sobbing. "Mum, Dad's gone. He's dead." The call, the one Ben Carter had mentioned. It had come 3 days before Arthur died. Eliza's phone had buzzed at 2 a.m. It was Arthur. Eli, I'm sorry," he'd slurred. His voice was thick, but underneath it was a terror Eliza had never heard. "I made a mistake, Eli. A terrible mistake." "Arthur, what's wrong? Are you okay?" She's not who she says she is. The doctor. They're partners. It's the art, Eli. The art, it's all fake. I think she's..." The line had crackled. Arthur, what is she doing?" "She's a spider, Eli," he'd whispered, a final, horrifying word. "And I'm all wrapped up. The will, she made me sign. The medicine, it makes me... I love you, Eli. Tell Leo The line went dead. She had tried to tell the police. They dismissed it as the ramblings of a sick man. And then the will was read, signed, dated the day after his call, witnessed by Serafina Vance and Dr. Alistair Finch. Eliza knew. In her bones, she knew. Arthur hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been murdered. And now, in this courtroom, his killer was about to walk away with everything, while Eliza, the weeping wife, was dismissed as a bitter, greedy ex. Serafina Vance, a name she had chosen for its serpentine elegance, watched Eliza Hayes crumble. It was always her favorite part. The moment the fight went out of them, the moment they realized the world was not fair and that she, Serafina, had won. Serafina was not a mistress. She was a professional. Arthur Hayes was not her first, nor her second. He was her fifth. Her methodology was precise, honed over a decade of careful work. She was a black widow, but she disdained the crude methods of her predecessors. Poison? Too messy? Too traceable? No, Serafina was an artist of a different kind. She dealt in isolation, manipulation, and pharmacology. She found them at their weakest, men in the grip of a midlife crisis, newly divorced or recently widowed. Men with large liquid assets and a desperate, aching need to feel powerful and desired again. She would meet them, a curated chance encounter at a charity auction, a high-end bar. She would be the one thing they couldn't have, and then, slowly, she would let them in. She mirrored their interests, validated their egos, and became their confessional. With Arthur, it had been laughably easy. He was desperate to be seen as more than a computer nerd. She'd called him a Renaissance man. He'd practically lapped at her feet. The next step was always isolation. She would systematically sever their ties. Friends were using them for money. Family was holding them back. And the wife was always the cold, controlling villain who never understood their genius. The final piece of the puzzle was her partner, Daniel Stryker, or as he was known in this life, Dr. Alistair Finch. Daniel was a disgraced pharmacist who had lost his license for selling opiates on the black market. Serafina had found him, cleaned him up, and given him a new purpose. He was her concierge doctor. Once Serafina had her target firmly in her web, Dr. Finch would be introduced. He'd run some advanced blood work and discover a rare underlying condition, a heart weakness, a liver anomaly, something that needed specialized private care. Then the cocktails began, a precise, untraceable blend of benzodiazepines, beta blockers, and other compounds. Not enough to kill, not at first. Just enough to induce confusion, lethargy, paranoia, and deep, suggestible depression. Arthur had been strong, so his decline took almost 3 months. In his moments of lucidity, he would get scared. He'd try to call Eliza or Leo. Serafina, his devoted caregiver, would be right there to coo at him, to tell him it was just a bad dream, and to up the dosage. "You're confused, my love," she'd murmur, stroking his sweaty hair. "Eliza is trying to have you declared incompetent. She wants to lock you away and take the company." She had planted the seeds of that fear for months. By the end, he believed it. He believed she was his only protector. The new will was the climax. Daniel Dr. Finch would have the patient, heavily sedated, but technically conscious. "Sign here, Arthur," Serafina had whispered, guiding his trembling hand. "This is for us. This protects you from Eliza." He had signed, his eyes rolling back in his head. Daniel signed as the first witness. The home care nurse, paid $10,000 in cash, signed as the second. 3 days later, Daniel administered the final, fatal overdose of a potassium chloride solution. It spiked Arthur's potassium levels, inducing cardiac arrest. By the time paramedics arrived, his body had already metabolized the chemical. The coroner ruled it a heart attack, complicated by his pre-existing condition. It was perfect. Clean. Serafina sat in court, letting Thorne handle the grieving wife. Her lawyer, Thorne, was a necessary expense. He was ambitious, immoral, and best of all, he knew not to ask too many questions. He saw a foolproof will and a massive payday. That's all he needed to see. Her only mistake, her only one, was that she'd gotten a little cocky. She'd allowed herself to whisper that final taunt to Eliza. It was unprofessional, a breach of her own rules. But an artist, she mused, deserves to sign her work. She glanced at Judge Reed. The old bat was just going through the motions. In an hour, Serafina would be the sole owner of Nexus Dynamics. She was already planning the liquidation. The house in the Palisades was first to go. She felt a flicker of impatience. She wanted this over. She had a flight to Monaco booked for the following week. She'd heard a Russian oligarch there had just lost his wife. "Court is back in session," the bailiff announced. Judge Reed settled behind the bench, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, I have reviewed Mr. Thorne's motion for summary judgment. Before I rule, do you have any further witnesses or evidence to present?" Eliza's heart sank. This was it, the final question before the gavel fell. Ben Carter stood, his palms sweating. He looked at Eliza, his eyes full of apology. He had one last-ditch effort. It was a Hail Mary, and he knew it. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Mr. Leo Hayes to the stand." Thorne shot to his feet. "Objection! Relevance? The son's emotional distress has no bearing on the will's legality. This is a tactic to waste the court's time and play on its sympathies." "Mr. Hayes is being called to testify about his father's state of mind and his final conversation, Your Honor," Carter countered, his voice shaking slightly. "It speaks directly to undue influence." Judge Reed fixed Thorne with a hard stare. "Mr. Thorne, you have spent the last hour painting a picture of a man who was happy, lucid, and free of his old family. I am allowing Mr. Carter to offer a rebuttal. Take a seat." Thorne sat, his jaw tight. Leo Hayes walked to the stand. He was 21, a mirror of his father's younger self, but with Eliza's steady eyes. He looked at Serafina with an icy hatred that made her, for the first time, feel a sliver of unease. "Mr. Hayes," Carter began, "can you describe your relationship with your father?" "He was my best friend," Leo said, his voice thick but strong. "Before her, after he met Ms. Vance, he changed. He wouldn't answer my calls. He'd send texts, but they didn't sound like him. They used words he'd never use, like negative energy and personal journey." "Did you try to see him during his illness?" "Every day." "She wouldn't let me in. She said I was stressing him out. She said I was siding with my mom and that it was toxic for his recovery." "And the last time you spoke to him?" "It was 2 days before he died. I finally got through on his private cell. He must have hidden the call. He sounded terrified." "Objection! Hearsay!" Thorne shouted. "Your Honor," Carter pleaded, "it goes to state of mind." "I'll allow it," Judge Reed said, leaning forward. "For that purpose only." "What did he say, Mr. Hayes?" Leo looked at the judge, his eyes brimming. "He said, 'She's got me trapped, Leo. The new doctor, he's not right. They're making me sign things.' I told him I was coming, that I'd break the door down, and he whispered, 'Don't come. She'll hurt you. She said she knows people. She's not who she says she is, Leo. It's all a lie. The gallery, the money, it's all—'" Leo choked on a sob. He said, "I'm so sorry, son. Tell your mother I love her. I always loved her." The courtroom was utterly silent. Eliza was sobbing openly now, her hands over her mouth. Thorne knew he had to destroy this. He stood for cross-examination, his face a sneer. "Mr. Hayes, you're 21 years old?" "Yes." "And you're currently a student at UCLA?" "Yes." "And your tuition? Who paid for that?" "My parents." "And this last semester?" "My mum. She had to take a loan." "Exactly," Thorne pounced. "Your father, in his new, clear state of mind, cut you off. Isn't it true that if this new will is upheld, your tuition is no longer guaranteed? Isn't it true that you, just like your mother, are here today because you've been cut out of the money?" "Objection!" Carter yelled, badgering the witness. "It's a question," Thorne roared back. "It's not about the money," Leo shouted, his face red. "She killed him." "Order!" Judge Reed's voice cracked like a whip. "Order in this court. Mr. Hayes, you will control yourself. Mr. Thorne, you will step back. That was a disgraceful line of questioning. Thorne bowed slightly. My apologies, Your Honor. I am simply trying to establish bias. The witness is not credible. He is an angry, disinherited son. I have no further questions. Leo walked back to his seat, defeated. He had told the truth, and Thorne had twisted it into greed. Mr. Carter, Judge Reed said, her voice heavy with what sounded like finality. Do you have anything else? Eliza looked at her lawyer. He was defeated. He had played his last card, and it wasn't enough. No, Your Honor, Carter whispered. The defense rests. Eliza closed her eyes. The tears of humiliation from the morning were gone, replaced by the hot, bitter tears of injustice. It was over. The woman who had murdered her husband, stolen her home, and destroyed her family had won. Thorne stood, smoothing his tie, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. Your Honor, the prosecution moves for summary judgment. This has gone on long enough. Judge Reed looked at the stack of papers before her. She looked at Thorne. She looked at a weeping Eliza. And she looked at Seraphina Vance, who was calmly checking her lipstick in a small gold compact. One moment, Mr. Thorne, the judge said. Her eyes had narrowed, not on Eliza, but on Seraphina. She was looking at the woman's lapel. I have a few questions of my own. Judge Evelyn Reed had been on the bench for 30 years. She had seen every kind of human depravity. She was, as her clerks often said, unshockable. But she was also a bloodhound for a lie, and the testimony of Seraphina Vance and Dr. Alastair Finch stank of it. It wasn't just Leo's testimony, which she found heartbreakingly credible. It was the details, the perfect will, the sealed medical records, the inadmissible handwriting expert. Thorne was too good at his job. He hadn't just won. He had systemically dismantled Eliza's case before it ever began. It was a preemptive strike, but most of all it was Seraphina herself. She was too calm. Griefy, real grief, was messy. It was ugly, inconsistent, and raw. Seraphina's grief was a performance. And then there was the pin. Throughout the testimony, Judge Reed had been staring at the small, intricate pin on Seraphina's lapel. It was an abstract, modern design, like a bird rising from flames, a phoenix. She'd seen it before. But where? While Leo was testifying, Judge Reed had scribbled a note and passed it to her clerk, a young, razor-sharp man named Thomas. The note was simple. Find this pin. Now. Thomas had slipped out of the courtroom and returned 10 minutes later, just as Ben Carter was resting his case. He placed a single sheet of paper, face down, on the judge's bench. Judge Reed had glanced at it. It was a screenshot from an online article, a charity gala in San Diego. A woman with a different hair color, but the same cold eyes, was wearing the same pin. The name beneath the photo was Helena Croft. Judge Reed had scribbled a new note. Pull the San Diego probate court records for Helena Croft and Marcus Blackwood. The name hit her like a thunderbolt. Marcus Blackwood, a case from 6 years prior, a wealthy biotech magnate, died of a sudden aggressive illness. His estranged family had contested the will, which left everything to his new caretaker, a woman named Helena Croft. The family lost. The caretaker vanished. Judge Reed had been a guest lecturer at USD's law school that year. She'd used the Blackwood case as an example of a perfectly legal, morally bankrupt proceeding. Now, as Thorne moved for his judgment, Thomas slipped her a second file. This one was thicker. It was the full, sealed file from the Blackwood case, including appeals documents. Judge Reed opened it. And there it was. It wasn't just the pin. It was the method, the isolation, the concierge doctor, the sudden illness, the last-minute will, the sealed medical records. And then she saw the signature, Helena Croft's signature on her 2019 legal affidavit. Judge Reed looked across her bench at the documents Seraphina Vance had filed for this case. She compared the signatures. Seraphina Vance. Helena Croft. The handwriting was identical. The S and V in Vance were looped with the exact same flourish as the H and C in Croft. A cold, pure rage, the kind only reserved for the deepest perversions of justice, settled in Judge Reed's chest. This woman hadn't just done this once. She was a serial predator. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Reed said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You are moving for summary judgment on the basis that the will of Arthur Hayes is valid and clear." "Yes, Your Honor. It is irrefutable. And your client, Miss Vance, has testified that she was Mr. Hayes's devoted fiancée and caregiver, and that she had never been involved in any legal disputes of this nature before." "That is correct, Your Honor," Thorne said, though a flicker of confusion crossed his face. "She is a private citizen, a humble gallery owner who has been thrust into this unfortunate and public situation." "I see." Judge Reed folded her hands. She looked past Thorne, past Eliza, and settled her gaze directly on the mistress. Eliza, seeing the judge's focus, held her breath. The crying had stopped. "Miss Vance," the judge said, her voice cutting through the silent room. "Please stand." Seraphina stood, a look of polite inquiry on her face. Her lawyer Thorne looked annoyed. "Your Honor, my client has already been—" "Quiet, Mr. Thorne," Reed snapped. She locked eyes with Seraphina. The courtroom was so quiet, Eliza could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Miss Vance, this is a simple procedural question," Judge Reed said, her voice calm, almost conversational. She paused, letting the silence stretch, tightening the noose. And then she delivered the sentence. "Can you please explain to the court why your testimony today matches, word for word, the testimony you gave in the 2019 probate case of Marcus Blackwood in San Diego, under the name Helena Croft?" If the judge had fired a gun, the effect would have been less profound. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air from the room. Eliza Hayes froze. Her mind raced, trying to pass the words. Marcus Blackwood? Helena Croft? Ben Carter's jaw dropped. Julian Thorne went chalk white. He spun around and stared at his client, his eyes wide with a dawning, abject horror. "Your Honor," he stammered, That is... I don't..." "Mr. Thorne, did your client fail to disclose this to you?" Judge Reed asked, her voice laced with ice. "Or did you fail to disclose it to the court?" But Seraphina's reaction was the most telling of all. The mask did not just slip, it shattered. The poised, grieving fiancée vanished. The blood drained from her face, leaving a waxy, sallow-grey pallor. Her eyes, those cold, confident eyes, darted left, then right. She was looking for an exit. She was no longer a person. She was a cornered animal. I, she began, her voice a reedy, unfamiliar squeak. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't?" Judge Reed held up the file. "Because I have the transcript right here. The 2019 case of Blackwood versus Croft. A wealthy man, an aggressive, sudden illness, a new will, an estranged family, and a devoted caretaker who inherited everything. The only difference is the name." "This is outrageous." Thorne finally found his voice, though it was an octave too high. You're ambushing my client. This is inadmissible. That case was... It was settled." "It was not," Judge Reed corrected, her voice rising in power. "It was overturned on appeal 2 years later, on grounds of suspected homicide." "But by then, Helena Croft had liquidated all of Mr. Blackwood's assets and had, quite conveniently, vanished. Until it seems she reappeared in my courtroom as Seraphina Vance. "Homicide," Eliza whispered the word. She looked at Seraphina, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a homewrecker, as a monster. It wasn't. They couldn't prove anything," Seraphina shrieked, her facade of sophistication dissolving into a raw, gutter panic. "They couldn't find you," Judge Reed shot back, "but they did find, upon exhumation, that Mr. Blackwood's system was saturated with a slow-acting, complex cocktail of cardiac toxins, the same illness, I suspect, that afflicted Mr. Hayes." Judge Reed leaned forward. "I have also taken the liberty of cross-referencing your Dr. Alistair Finch. His medical credentials, just like your name, are a complete fabrication. His real name is Daniel Stryker, a pharmacist who lost his license in Florida for, let's see, gross medical malpractice and trafficking of controlled substances. The same doctor who co-signed the will. The same doctor who I see from this file was the concierge physician for Mr. Blackwood in San Diego." The room was electric. Thorne had stepped away from Seraphina as if she were radioactive. "And this pin, Miss Croft," Judge Reed said, pointing. "The Phoenix pin. It's from the Lazarus Group. Not a charity, but an S-Corp, a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The same shell company that Helena Croft and Daniel Stryker used to launder Marcus Blackwood's $80 million estate. Every word was a nail in the coffin. Seraphina's mind was a siren. Run, run, run! The money was gone. The game was over. All that was left was the cage. "No, no, no!" she whimpered. She looked at Thorne, pleading. "Julian, do something!" Thorne looked at her with pure contempt. You lied to me. You exposed me. He was finished. His career was over. He had been so blinded by the money, he hadn't done his due diligence. He had been her fool. Seraphina's composure broke. A raw animal wail of pure terror tore from her throat. She could see the bailiffs, who had been standing at ease, now moving to flank the doors. She backed away from the table. Her legs, which had seemed so steady, so elegant, suddenly turned to water. And then it happened. Seraphina Vance, Helena Croft, the masterful predator, the architect of ruin, crumpled. Her knees buckled. She didn't faint. She fell. She landed on the hard linoleum floor of the courtroom, not in a polite bow, but in a pathetic, grovelling heap. She was on her hands and knees. The weeping wife, Eliza, was now standing, watching in stunned silence. The triumphant mistress was kneeling. "Please!" Seraphina begged, her voice muffled by the floor. She wasn't speaking to the judge anymore. She was speaking to the universe. "Please, no, don't. Don't lock me up, please." Judge Reed watched her for one cold, satisfied second. Then she raised her gavel. "It is the judgment of this court," she declared, her voice booming, "that the will of Arthur Hayes, dated October 14th, is null and void, having been procured by gross fraud, conspiracy, and clear criminal undue influence." Bang! "It is the further order of this court that all assets of the Hayes estate be immediately frozen and returned to the control of the original estate, under Mrs. Eliza Hayes." Bang! "And finally, based on the evidence of grand fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and the outstanding warrant for Helena Croft from the state of San Diego, I am ordering Miss Vance into immediate custody to be held without bail pending a full criminal investigation. Bailiffs," she commanded, "take this woman away." The two large bailiffs moved in. They didn't offer a hand. They seized Serafina by her upper arms and hauled her to her feet. The veil fell from her hair. Her face was a grotesque mask of tears and mucus. "You can't do this to me," she screamed, all pretense of a human being gone. She was a feral thing. "I didn't do it. He was sick. He loved me. He loved me!" She twisted and kicked as they dragged her, a multi-millionaire predator, from the courtroom, her expensive heels scraping against the floor. The heavy wooden doors banged shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence. Eliza Hayes stood, her hand over her heart. She was breathing, really breathing, for the first time in a year. She looked at her son, Leo, who was staring, aghast. She looked at Ben Carter, who looked like he'd just seen a miracle. Then, Eliza Hayes looked at Judge Evelyn Reed. The judge met her gaze. She gave a single, small, sharp nod. And for the first time, Eliza's tears were not of grief or humiliation or rage. They were tears of release. She sat down, put her head in her hands, and let the long, dark year finally, truly, wash away. The Nightingale widow case, as the press immediately dubbed it, exploded across the national consciousness. It was a dark cocktail of sex, money, and murder that the 24-hour news cycle devoured. Serafina's face, the beautiful grieving fiancée from the courtroom, was now juxtaposed with a gallery of her other identities. Helena Croft of San Diego, Selena Vance of Austin, Catherine March of Portland. She was a ghost, a chameleon, a predator who had operated in the open for a decade. For Eliza and Leo, the weeks that followed were a surreal blur of lawyers, police, and grief. A new, more complex grief. The man they had lost was no longer just the husband and father who had betrayed them. He was a man who had been psychologically tortured, chemically imprisoned, and executed. The anger they felt was a clean, cold fury that burned away the last of their tears. "That phone call," Leo said to his mother one night, staring out at the city lights. He said, "I'm so sorry. He was trying to come back, Mum, and she killed him for it." The criminal investigation was swift and brutal. Daniel Stryker, Dr. Finch, was apprehended at LAX, trying to board a one-way flight to Panama with a briefcase full of cash and bearer bonds. Facing a capital murder charge and the chilling realization that Serafina would feed him to the wolves to save herself, Stryker made a deal. His confession, delivered over 3 days, was a horrifying monologue of clinical detachment. He detailed the chemical cocktails he had designed, customized for each victim. For Arthur Hayes, it was a precise blend of digoxin to weaken his heart and beta blockers to create profound depression and lethargy, making him susceptible to Serafina's gaslighting. The final dose, the potassium chloride, was his signature. Untraceable after a few hours, mimicking a perfect natural heart attack. He confessed to everything. Marcus Blackwood. 3 other men in 3 other states. Serafina, he explained, was the artist. She found the targets, crafted the narrative, and managed the psychological warfare. He was the scientist, ensuring the natural causes were medically plausible. Their partnership was lethally efficient. Arthur's body was exhumed. The toxicology report confirmed Stryker's story. The evidence was irrefutable. Eliza, now in full control of Nexus dynamics, found the fire that had built her empire had not gone out. It had just been waiting for fuel. She was no longer the weeping wife. She was an instrument of justice. She poured the company's legal resources into the prosecution, not just for Arthur, but for all the victims. She flew to Austin, to Portland, to San Diego, meeting with the families who, like her, had been dismissed as greedy and estranged. She sat in their living rooms, listening to their stories of being gaslighted, isolated and legally castrated by the grieving fiancé. She formed a coalition, a network of the disbelieved, and ensured they were all flown to Los Angeles, ready to testify. The fate of the lawyers was a study in contrasts. Julian Thorne, Serafina's arrogant shark, was ruined. He was brought before the state bar on charges of willful negligence and professional misconduct. He wasn't a co-conspirator. Serafina was too smart for that, always insulating herself. But his reputation was shattered. He had been so blinded by the money and his own arrogance that he hadn't run a simple background check. He was a legal pariah, a laughingstock. Ben Carter, meanwhile, became a local hero, hailed for his tenacity and unwavering faith in his client. His small practice was suddenly flooded with offers. Eliza, recognizing true loyalty, retained him personally. She brought him on as Nexus Dynamics' new general counsel, with a salary that changed his life and his family's forever. 9 months later, Eliza Hayes walked into a different courtroom. This time it was Criminal Court, Department 104. She was not a petitioner. She was the star witness. The trial was a media circus, but inside, the mood was somber. Serafina Vance, stripped of her designer clothes, her perfect hair and her allies, looked small and cheap in her orange jumpsuit. Her eyes, once cold and confident, were now dull and dead, betraying a bone-deep emptiness. The evidence was an avalanche. Stryker's damning testimony, the bank records from the Lazarus Group Shell Company, the toxicology reports. The other families, one by one, took the stand, their stories weaving a devastating tapestry of predation. But it was Eliza's testimony that sealed the tomb. She was calm, precise, and unshakable. When the prosecutor played the audio of Arthur's last 2 a.m. call, a collective gasp swept the courtroom. The terror in his voice was palpable, the sound of a man whispering from his own grave. Serafina, for the first time, flinched. The jury was out for less than an hour. The speed of the verdict was its own kind of condemnation. Eliza and Leo sat in the front row, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white as the foreman stood. On the count of murder in the 1st degree, concerning Arthur Hayes. Guilty. On the count of murder in the 1st degree, concerning Marcus Blackwood. Guilty. One by one, the 5 counts of murder, the 5 counts of grand fraud, the conspiracy charges, all guilty. Serafina didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stared, as if she couldn't comprehend a world she wasn't in complete control of. At the sentencing hearing, the judge, a woman with the same steel as Evelyn Reed, looked down at the killer. "You are a predator of the highest order," she said, her voice ringing with contempt. "You didn't just steal these men's money. You stole their dignity, their families, and their final days. You are a black hole in human form." She sentenced Serafina to 5 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 years for the fraud. She would die in prison. As the bailiffs cuffed her and led her away, Serafina's eyes, for one last second, met Eliza's. The hatred was gone. The confidence was gone. There was nothing left at all. The nightingale was caged, and the silence was, for Eliza, the first sound of peace. Life, for Eliza Hayes, found a new normal. It was a normal she had never anticipated, forged in the fires of betrayal and a courtroom battle that had stripped her bare. She was a widow, but not a grieving one. Her grief was a complex, jagged thing, poisoned by the betrayal, but sharpened by the knowledge that Arthur had been a victim as much as a fool. Reclaiming Nexus Dynamics was its own kind of war. The board of directors, men who had known her for decades as Arthur's wife, were wary. They saw an emotional widow, a woman who had just been through a public, humiliating trauma. They suggested she take a leave of absence, that she let a steady, objective hand guide the company. Eliza had walked into that first board meeting, not in weeping black, but in a steel-grey suit. The woman who had cried in court was gone. "Gentlemen," she had said, her voice quiet but filling the room. "For 25 years, I was the steady hand. I built this company while Arthur had the visions. I balanced the books you never read, and I secured the loans you were too afraid to ask for. His name was on the door, but my fingerprints are on the foundation. This company is not just his legacy, it is mine. You will either get in line, or I will consider your resignation." They got in line. Leo, who had taken a full year off from UCLA, was by her side. The trial and its horrifying revelations had aged him, forging his youthful idealism into a sharp, discerning resolve. He wasn't just the son anymore. He was her partner. He took over the company's internal security, his eyes now as sharp as Judge Reed's, vetting every new high-level hire, every contract, ensuring no one like Serafina or Daniel could ever slip through the cracks again. The glass and redwood house in the Palisades, a monument to a life that was half truth, half lie, was sold inside a week. Eliza let the new owners have everything inside, the furniture, the art, the memories. She walked out with only a box of old photographs and her son. Their new home was a modern condo in Santa Monica, all glass and light, overlooking the vast, cleansing expanse of the Pacific. It had no history. It was a blank page. Using the first of her reclaimed profits, Eliza established the Blackwood Hayes Fund, a legal aid non-profit for families battling probate fraud. She had met the other families, the Blackwoods from San Diego, the Prestons from Texas, the Canes from Oregon. They had formed a strange, sad club, bound by a shared, specific nightmare. They had all been the greedy, estranged relatives. Now, with Eliza's funding, they had a voice. 1 year to the day after Serafina's conviction, Eliza drove to the cemetery alone. She had not visited Arthur's grave since the reburial. She'd had him moved to a quiet plot, away from the fanfare, under a simple oak tree. She stood before the new granite headstone. Arthur Hayes, husband, father, visionary. She had stared at the word husband for an hour at the stonemasons, the bitter taste of betrayal rising in her throat. He had been her husband. He had also been a fool, a vain, weak man, blinded by a predator's flattery. He had chosen a fantasy, and in doing so had sentenced himself to death and his family to ruin. He was the man who had screamed at her, "You only care about the company," and the man who had whispered, "Tell your mother I love her. I always loved her." How could both men be the same person, she realized, standing there in the quiet, that both were true. He was a complex, flawed, brilliant, and broken man, the visionary who saw the future of tech but couldn't see the spider in his own bed. He was the man she had loved, the man who had abandoned her, and the man who, in his final, terrified moments, had tried to come home. She placed a single white rose on the cool stone. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness, not entirely. It was one of acknowledgement, an acknowledgement of the 23 good years, the one terrible year, and the final, desperate phone call that had given her the first thread to pull. "It's over, Arthur," she whispered, not to him, but to the wind. "The company is safe. Leo is safe. You're free of her. And so am I." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the stone path, not looking back. She did not weep. The time for weeping was long past. Across town, in the quiet, wood-paneled chambers of the LA courthouse, Judge Evelyn Reed was packing her books. Her retirement was official in 1 week. Her clerks had framed one of the newspaper articles from the Nightingale case. The headline was bold: "Judge's one sentence brings down a killer." She looked at it, a rare, small smile on her lips. It wasn't the sentence that had done it, she knew. It was the pin, a tiny, vain mistake, a flicker of arrogance. Justice, in her 30 years, rarely arrived like a thunderbolt. It wasn't like in the movies. It was a game of inches, of details. It was about listening, truly listening, to the weeping wife and seeing the flicker of a lie in the predator's eyes. It was about pulling the one thread, a name, a date, a pin, that could unravel a perfect crime. She looked at the last stack of cases on her desk, a new probate dispute, a new family, a new fight. She sighed, picked up her gavel, and got back to work. There was still justice to be done. The gavel fell, not just on a case, but on a web of lies that spanned a decade. Eliza Hayes walked out of that courtroom, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She got justice for her husband, and she reclaimed her life. But the most terrifying part? People like Serafina Vance and Daniel Stryker are real. They walk among us, experts in manipulation, hiding behind a charming smile. This story is a warning that true justice sometimes requires one person, like Judge Reed, to look past the performance and see the truth. What did you think of Judge Reed's incredible moment of justice? Do you think the lawyer, Julian Thorne, should have faced jail time too? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story shocked you and you want to hear more true-life drama where the truth is stranger than fiction, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you never miss a moment of justice.